Good morning. Welcome to Sunday at the Dayton Hamvention. At 9:15, we'll be streaming the bicycle mobile hams. At 10:30, we'll stream the fast track to HF. Please stand by. We'll be with you in a second or three.
you did, okay. Go to the very beginning, actually the first slide, the first JPEG.
So where do you want to go?
That very top one, 2022 slides. Okay, and then go down to that one there, yeah. Yeah, that's the one.
Perfect.
How do I get to the next one? Is there an arrow here? Okay, yep, I'm good. Good morning. Everybody hear me? Okay, I love microphones. My name is Mike, November, Fox 0 November. I'm the forum guy today. This is the Bicycle Mobile Hams of America Forum. This is our 31st forum. The first one was in 1990. Was anybody here for that one besides me? Anybody? Okay, usually I have one or two guys that are still alive that are from that forum, but not today. Okay, we have 1 hour today. Unfortunately, that's all we have. We've probably got enough material we could fill the whole day, but we'll do it in 1 hour's time somehow. Okay, I'm going to show how we got here. Okay, I mentioned this is the 31st one. The very first forum was 1990. It was in DARA Arena, room 7. The room was completely filled. I think there was 150 people, but it only held about 75. So it was very popular. We've had forums every year since that time, except the last 2 years when nobody came to Hamvention, and 1 year when the ARRL took all of the space when they were first starting to work with the Hamvention, so we didn't have a place we could have the forum. So what I want to do is take a few minutes to go through how we got here, how BMHA, Bicycle Mobile Hams of America, got started, where it's been, hopefully where it's going, something like today. The slide you see up here is our original founder, November Alpha Zero Alpha. In 1986 was his 50th high school class reunion. He thought it would be a kind of a fun deal to ride his bike to his high school for his class reunion. That was great. He lived in Boulder, Colorado. His high school was in Lynn, Massachusetts, right outside of Boston. So I'm going to show just a few slides on how he got to where he was and what took place after that, and then we're going to have our main topic and speaker. So I try not to take too much time. But Hartley was an entrepreneur, had several different businesses, one including he built bags for bicycles. So he was kind of bicycle oriented. He wrote a book about cycling in Colorado. He was a photographer, a writer, and a guy that could get publicity no matter where he went. And he did that. So this is what he looked like when he started. He always was highly visible on his steel 45-pound bike. That wasn't right. Okay, whenever you take a bicycle trip, a long one like that, you gotta tell the XYL goodbye. He did. Gave her a good sweet kiss there. That's when he was in Colorado. This is the route that he took. He went through Nebraska, Iowa, and all those different states there that you see. And he made friends along the way because he took his 2-meter radio along with his 5-pound charger, 4 spare batteries, a tape recorder, a weather station, and a few other things that were electronic, and he carried them all that way. I think the charger and the batteries and all the radio stuff was probably 15 pounds. It was not today's technology, obviously. But that's the route he took. You notice he went through Nebraska. That's where I live. There's Nebraska, the good life. So we took a picture while he was coming through Nebraska. There's the equipment he took with him. You can see the weight, just how much that was. Even a repeater directory. He did it on 2 meters, so that he worked all the repeaters and made friends. He would go to they'd invite him to breakfast, and they'd get all together and meet him, and it was just a friendly time when he rode. Got a little publicity in CQ magazine. Pedal power to his 50th. There he is. I think this was Sutton, Nebraska. That's him looking backwards toward us. But there's all the friends that turned out just to see Hartley riding his bicycle all the way to Boston. Crazy guy. When you gotta go, you gotta go. And there he came across the toll bridge and along the Mississippi River. I don't know exactly where that was, but he was going to cross over to whatever the next state is. Made it to Ohio. So you know if he took the picture, he had to be there, and there he is. And there's the rest of his trip. Once he got to Ohio, he went up through, kind of followed the lake up there, went across New York, and was headed towards Lynn, Massachusetts, which is right there, almost on the ocean, Boston. Made it to Pennsylvania, New York, good old New York. I lived there for a while, never did like it. Okay, there's the rest trip. He's getting closer. Now this trip took him, I believe it was just a couple days short of a month when he did it. I have some pictures, but I'm not showing them today, where he did his statistics where he rode. He showed how many days of headwind he had, how many hills he climbed. He admitted that he walked his bike up several hills. Never admits you walk a bike up a hill. But he did. He was honest. And he showed some of the other statistics too, you know, where he stayed and all this kind of stuff. Since he talked to all these people along the way, a lot of people sent him QSL cards. That's his there on the bottom. And there's one from New York, and WA0BOK, who happens to be was a very good friend of mine in Nebraska, so I was glad to see that card. He did walk a hill. He admitted it. I don't know who took the picture, but he's walking his bike. Okay, there he is waving to his high school. When he got to Lynn, Massachusetts, he waved at that a couple of times and took a couple passes. He told me once personally, he said, Mike, there was one hill when I was a kid in my hometown of Lynn I could never climb. He said, I climbed it at age 67. He said, I did it and I was the proudest man in the world. Okay, he got publicity. Right there's the local newspaper in Massachusetts. He made it to his class reunion. Kind of a hero's welcome, he said. When you're done, you got to go home. And that's how we got BMHA started. After he did this, he then had the forum in 1990, and he had a sheet of paper that he said, asked if any volunteers would be interested in forming a bicycle club for hams who ride their bicycles, and that's how we got started. I think it originally started with about 150 members, and this club has existed clear up until today. For about 10 years, we had monthly newsletters. Everybody paid $10 to help pay the postage. We had enough people to write articles. Went for about 10 or 11 years. I happen to have brought about a dozen CDs that have all of those newsletters on them. Even though they're dated, there's a lot of good articles in there and pictures with how to mount antennas on your bike, how to mount things on your bicycle that are radio related, handhelds, antennas, mounts, all that stuff. I only brought about 10 or 11. If you're interested in one, they're up here. I have a donation envelope. Right now, BMHA does not charge any dues. Everybody is free. You can sign up and join to get in the database in case we have emails going out or want to get contacts with people. But we don't charge any dues. We don't really ask anybody for money. We're still existing on the money that Hartley Alley raised during his lifetime. We've used that money judiciously. We only spend it on postage, any other expenses we might have, which are minimal. 2 people run the group, myself, I'm still the secretary treasurer. Skip, AA6WK in California, runs the website, and there's a database where he keeps track of the members. You can join. I've got some membership applications up here if you want to get on the list for the database. And then there's also another sheet that talks a little bit about BMHA and has the website and the address for that, and also for Google.io groups. We have a group called BMHA. And there's quite a bit of activity on that. Even though we don't have membership dues or anything like that, there's still quite a bit of activity on that particular forum. And there's lots of good ideas. You can ask questions on there. People that look at it will answer, and there's some pretty good people out there that have mounted things on their bicycles, so feel free to use those 2 things. Anyhow, those sheets are up here. I'll have somebody start passing each one around, and if you're interested in the CD, they're in this little white box up here. Okay. So we have one, I guess I call him a professional speaker because he's done that about, I don't know how many years he's been speaking and bringing his bicycle and talking about how he puts things on that bike, stuff I've never even considered. So I like what he does. And every time I need a speaker for the forum, I contact him and he says yes every time, poor guy. Does a great job. I'm not exactly sure what town he's from, but because he rides everywhere. But Steve D'Amico, do I have the call right? KC8 QVO. Yep. I won't use the phonetics. Okay, KC8 QVO. Is David King here? Not yet. Okay, I had one more person that I wanted to have say a few words. If he shows up, I'll have him do it, but I don't see him yet. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Steve. We've got until at least 10:15, maybe 10:25 for our time frame. So while he's starting, I'll pass out these other things. And thanks everybody for coming. It's good to see everybody.
How is everybody? Glad to be back at Hamvention again after the 2-year dry spell.
Yeah, but the campground I normally go to got bought out by people who do not know how to run a campground.
That's not any fun.
It's a gigantic mess.
Adventure Cycling magazines are here. Anybody can take it.
Yeah, there are adventure cycling magazines that are up front on the top row of seats, front row seats. If anybody wants them, they're free for the taking. Get that closed out. Okay, so as we get going here, one thing I'll mention is that cycling for me is always an adventure, as is a lot of things in life, whether that's going out to eat at a new restaurant or just trying a new activity. For me, it's all about an adventure. This presentation I didn't really rehearse, I just kind of put it together, so it's an adventure for all of us this morning. So we'll go on that together. In 2020, during the pandemic shutdowns, I ended up running the Ohio to Erie bike route, which is from, if you do it south to north, it's from Cincinnati to Cleveland, or the Ohio River up to Lake Erie. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but the 2 main topics that I had, the first one is trip planning, talking about elevation and distance data. So if you're thinking about going on a bike trip, a lot of times People question, well, how far can I go in a day, or where do I go, generally speaking, you know, what area of the country, or, you know, where would you like to go for a ride? And then you can dig into that a little bit deeper and find exactly how you're gonna get there. So what specific routes that you want to take, and, you know, if they're safe to ride, et cetera. So that's a lot of what we'll talk about. I do have a YouTube channel. It's QRP to QRO. There's 2 videos up there actually on my Ohio to Erie bike trip. A lot of it relates to gear and the setups. So if you would like to jot those down, you can watch those at a later date. In the description of those videos, I do have timestamps of what sections or whether it's you know, camping gear or clothing or food, whatever. They're all organized in there. So again, as far as bike trip planning goes, a few of the main questions: how far can I go in a day? Where should you ride? What general location? And then again, the more specific routing. So do you want to take a 2-lane major state highway, or do you want to take a multi-use path or a conventional rail trail that's meant for biking and multi-use? So a few of the tools that I use, I'm actually going to do this live too, so we'll break away from the slideshows a little bit as we go. But Strava is one of the main tools that I do use. That's an online repository for your personal information, so you can tie that in with a bike computer. And the way that I have it run through my system is every time that I stop the bike computer, it actually automatically uploads through my phone out to Strava, which is a fantastic way to collect that information and host it for later viewing. So I'll try to get my internet connection going here. The other aspect of Strava that's really nice, and I'm going to show that to you here first, is the heat map. How many of you actually have heard of Strava? Does anybody use it? Okay, there's quite a few of you guys actually. Well, that's a good thing. Let's see if we can break away from this. There we go. So this is what the main heat map looks like, and what this is, in fact, if you go out to, I won't do it right now, but if you go back out and reload this page, it comes up with a pop-up that tells you how they collect the data. It's a rolling 2-year set of information. So everybody that uses a bike computer that is set up to record data and link it through Strava, it will collect that information and generalize it and display it, and that's what we see here, is the intensity of traffic on certain routes, and the higher the traffic, the brighter the lines or the light that you see. I'll bring this up too. Look at the contrast just for a quick look of Europe versus America. So the density is just astronomically more in Europe. But going back to the question of generally where would you like to ride, this is a great tool. If you look at this elevation level, you can start seeing these brighter lines, like one across Iowa. There's one across Missouri. If you scroll down a little bit, there's the Notches Trace. How many have heard of the Notches Trace bike path? Yep, there's a couple of you. So you can see that it goes from is that Nashville, Tennessee, down to Notches, Mississippi. Is not quite as intense as some of the other lines. The Gap in CNO, Pittsburgh to DC. Anybody heard of that one? That shows up here, going down through Maryland. You've got the Ohio Erie Canal Trail Network that goes through New York. So there's a lot of things that you can see at this elevation. If you scroll in a little bit, you can see the Ohio to Erie that diagonally slices through Ohio. Anybody in here from Ohio? A couple of you? Ever heard of the Bermuda Triangle? You know, yeah, we have an Ohio Triangle. Do you know that? If you zoom in a little bit, you can see here's the Ohio Triangle. Urban legend has it that several riders have started that and never returned. If you look, there's even a dead spot in the data. But no, that's a joke. I just no, but it is interesting to look at the map and all the information you can see. The fact that technology has got to the point where you can do this, it's great. But going back to the question of routing and what rides you want to do, or if a road is safe to ride on, if you're trying to get from point A to point B, then use this map and check and see if anybody, or if there's a higher amount of traffic on one route versus another, and then those would probably be the first ones I would dig into. But we'll get to that in a little bit, because I'm going to continue on with some of the other tools that get back into the same, answering the same questions there.
This also getting information from the authorities and stuff like, oh, that's a great route, except we just closed it for the next 3 days.
What I have heard as far as the data that Strava was collecting early on was for municipalities to try to prioritize where to put in multi-use paths and sidewalks. So they were trying to collect that data, but when you look at it from a more of a hobby aspect or a fitness aspect of riding, there's a lot of use that all of us can get out of it. So.
Yeah, I know we got the trail that goes through, and there really isn't a good E2 or E5, and they have to take the bridge out. And somehow or other, the bikers have been so active. I know that there was a lot of information, sites like this, with perfect route that ends with no bridge for the next month. And I was wondering, are they trying to acquire this information? Is there ways and places to actually put that data in?
Yeah, that I can't answer. I'm not real sure. Actually, the Ohio to Erie, if you go down south into Cincinnati, just north of Cincinnati, they've got Sunken Lunken, the old airport. Well, there's a bypass that they've been working on for probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. It's been in the planning stages, but they're finally putting in a bridge that goes up and over the river down there, so you don't have to take that detour out by the old airport. So I think that's supposed to be completed this year. But again, it goes back into the question of routing and what, how you find which way to go. If you have something that is closed off and blocked off, you need to reroute and get yourself around it. So another tool that is extremely useful is Ride with GPS. It's an online mapping system. Oh, there it is. I had it out already. Looking for my note sheet. Like I said, we're going on an adventure. Let me see which of the examples I want to show you guys. Okay, so Ride with GPS. If you're familiar with the Garmin style bike computers with GPS and routing capabilities, you can import files to that. And Ride with GPS is one fantastic way that you can do such. So we'll pull up a couple here. And if we go back to the question of multi-use paths and bike paths, as far as taking those instead of roads, I'll show you this example here. Oh, that's our TDT. There we go. Of course, I'm trying to find it fast and I'm skipping right over it. There it is. So part of this does fall on the Ohio to Erie route. This was part of a ride that I did back in, I think that was 19. So if we zoom in a little bit, you'll notice that there's other colors in here. There's blues and greens. The blue and green refers to the different trail networks. So if you're going through a particular area, then you can click on these lines and you can draw your line segments, and that will create your path. And you can designate those instead of taking the roads. So I think in this particular route, I actually shaved off maybe 3 or 4 miles of riding on the roads to bike trails. And a lot of those I'd never rode on before, and never even knew that they were there until I came to ride with GPS, and then ended up mapping that out. So that can save a lot of, if you don't like riding on the roads per se, dealing with the traffic and whatnot, that can save a lot of road time just in that. And one other note too with the ride with GPS is I have found that to be extremely up to date, at least for Ohio. So a lot of times I've found in that it even has updates in there that Google Maps doesn't even show yet, which I think we're going to get to Google Maps and Bing Maps next. Yep. So a couple things that are really good to use with this mapping type of online system is both the satellite view and the street level or trail level, which as time progresses, there is more and more coverage of the street level view on bike trails and multi-use paths. So we'll go out and check those real fast also. And again, just for discussion's sake, we'll zoom into Ohio, since that's what I'm most familiar with, but you can do this for any area. Change the layers. I always like using the satellite map, and then we can also overlay the biking layer, which brings up all different types of trails. You'll see those highlighted in the neon green. And one I want to zoom into is around Urbana. I'll show you that in just a second as to why. So there's our trail, and you'll notice the designation on Google Maps even shows this. You have the solid neon green for the paved trails, and then you have the dashed neon green for the unpaved or dirt trails. And if we go to the street level or trail level, it highlights, so we can drop our little man dude right on there. And now we're looking at the trail. And one thing I will point out, there it is right there, is this image is from 2016. And I've actually walked this. We did that last fall just to scope things out, because this is part of another loop ride that I want to do here in the not too distant future. But this section of trail was actually covered with chip and seal. So it's not fully asphalt, but it's not loose gravel either. So sometimes you have to take what Google Maps shows you with a grain of salt. Like I said, this is from 2016, the imagery, but that trail surface has actually been upgraded since then. But if you want a basic overview, check the image capture date and then zoom in on it if it has the option to do so. And you can check out those areas. So there's a lot of other information that you can find. If you find a park or a church or something that has a pavilion, go down to the trail level and check out the facilities there before you embark on your trip. Go back to our slideshow. So a couple of important points to bring up too with the mapping and the routing is one of the main questions you're trying to answer is a particular road or route safe to ride? A couple things to think about. If you're way out in the boonies and you're on a deserted 2-lane road, you probably don't have a whole lot to worry about. On the Ohio to Erie Trail, that would be like up around Dalton, Apple Creek. There's a lot of road sections in there that are pretty hilly, but it's all Amish country, so there are some, tractors and things you have to watch out for, but it's not Route 42 through Plain City. So a couple things. When you're looking at the general areas, those state routes, do they service any industrial areas, mines, gravel pits, cement factories, logging tracks, anything that's serviced by a lot of truck traffic? That's really no man's land for bike riding. Even if there was that type of activity in an area that I was going to, then the two options I would have are either go at odd hours when they're not probably out there, or find an alternative, even if it takes you a day or two out of the way, just to get away from some of those high traffic areas. So we'll get into historical data and tracking that. There's the saying that what goes up must go down, but in riding, it's more important that what goes down must go up. So if you look at my arrow here, that was crossing a valley. I think that's the Scioto Valley. So you may be cruising downhill with the wind in your hair and going 15, 20 miles an hour like nothing, but it's going to catch up to you on the other side because you got that hill to go back up to climb out of the valley. And especially if you're loaded, you're going to be out there for a while. Of course, the more weight that you have, the slower and tougher that's going to go. Even Mike mentioned Hartley walked up a few hills. We all do that from time to time. So I'll show you my my spreadsheet here. There's a couple of ways we'll get into in a second for determining, again, answering that question, well, how far do I go in a day? A lot of it comes down to fitness level and what you're comfortable with riding. And what I do, I've been doing this since I started distance riding. I guess that was back in 14 maybe. But I collect all of my ride data in a spreadsheet. I know Strava does that automatically, but I'm kind of old school, I guess, and I like going back to the data. But I like collecting the mileage, the time, average speed, average cadence, and the maximum cadence, maximum speed, and then the elevation. The fan just kicked on behind me. Can you guys still hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Do you have a question? Or are you good? Okay. So with the data collection, that's the way that I go back in history. Sometimes I take notes, but a lot of the bigger rides, like the ones down here that you see in this season, that are 20 miles, that's a fairly routine ride that I've done. So I know which way I'm going and which way the elevation is. I have a comfort level with the amount of gear that I have versus what that ride is, what my fitness level is, and what that does to me. So, a lot of the rides that I've done in the past, if I do day trips, like Delaware State Park is a place I've gone to quite a few times. Those rides are usually like 54, 55 miles. So, as far as if I'm in shape, then I know that distance and the elevation on that, because it's a routine ride, I know what to expect. But when I'm in shape, that is, for me, that's about the most amount of miles that I'd want to do in a day with a load, but I'm comfortable with that. So for me, it's a good benchmark. And that's what we're trying to do, is find some way that we can collect information and have our own benchmark, because what might be acceptable for me might be different for you or anybody else. Ride your own ride, figure out what's comfortable for you, and that's the main thing with the data. So once we have that data, then how do we start looking at that and progressing with it? And how do we go from data to a route? Yes. Yes. That's the total amount of climbing feet on that ride. I don't have the descending elevation in there because it doesn't really matter. Like I said, if you're flying downhill and you got the wind in your hair, it doesn't really matter. But what does matter is the gain. So there's two ways, we'll get to that in a minute. There's two ways that you can figure out. One of them is the climbing index that we'll get to in a minute, excuse me. But once you figure out what that correlation is between distance and elevation, that's kind of your main guide to answering that question of how far can I go in a day. If you have 1,500 feet of gain and you're only going 12 miles, or you have 1,500 feet of gain and you're going 300 miles, major difference. So you need to know that ahead of time, and I'll actually show you, coming up pretty quick, I'll show you an example of that as to what kind of taught. It didn't really teach me that lesson, it kicked it in my rear end. Where are we? There we go. Okay, so the first example that I'll bring up is an early ride that I did in 2019. This is actually my first overnight, if you want to call it that. It wasn't supposed to be that, but it ended up being that just because of timing and whatnot. So this ride for that day was right at 71 miles, and we have an elevation gain of 745 feet. The data from this, actually, I did screenshots from Strava. If we have time, I don't think we will, but we may go out there and look at some of those live. But what I want to show on this is the graph on the bottom. So you can see, yeah, the 745 feet, to some it may sound like a lot of elevation, but you also have to take into consideration the distance. So if you look at the elevation profile, it's fairly flat. There is up to about, I don't know, around the 45-mile mark. It's generally going up, increasing in elevation, and then it flattens out and starts going down a little bit. So I know from riding this when I did, to me that amount of elevation and that mileage was okay. I was comfortable with that. So we get to day number 2, and this is kind of the kick in the shorts. If you look at the mileage first, we're at just under 18 miles with about 400 feet of elevation gain. Well, the Ohio to Erie Trail, this section of it is built on an old train track or train bed. So of course trains don't like hills, right? So most of the time the rail trail networks like that, they're always going to be on relatively flat ground. If you get off of that and you have to wind through town a little bit, sometimes there is some up and down. But in this case, I wasn't staying on the trail. I was actually going somewhere, so I had to divert off the trail close to where I was going and then go up into town. Well, in that area, that's the Miami River Valley. In that area, as soon as you get off the trail, pretty much the elevation shoots up on both sides. So you'll notice that here in the elevation profile. And if we overlay some numbers on top of this, you'll see even in one spot there's a 16.1% grade. You want to talk about walking up a hill? Try pulling a bike with about 100 pounds of stuff on it, going up that kind of a grade. That was a tough day. And the interesting thing, again, going back to the data, I didn't take into consideration all of these details at that time, and that's why I'm using this as my presentation topic to try and give a real example of that, because I did maybe what somebody just basically starting out would do is look at the map and say, okay, well, I want to get from here to here, and there's my trip. There's a little bit more to it, because if you come across something like this grade and you're not expecting it, that may add a day or two to your trip. So it's not necessarily the end of the world, but if you don't route plan, you don't factor that into where you're going, that can be a big issue. So another example, one thing I'm trying to work into is using a bike trailer for a number of reasons, but that'll take a lot of the weight off the bike for one, but it gives me a lot more options as far as electronics and radio stuff goes. So that's a topic for another time. But this particular ride was one of those 20-mile runs with about 385 feet of elevation. And you can see from the elevation profile on the bottom, it is relatively flat, but looking at the numbers, it does generally slope up. So I know from riding that that ride, that is doable. So when I'm in good shape, then that is in the realm of possibilities for my riding. There is my bike setup on that particular ride. Yes. What kind of trailer do I use? So, interesting question, because somebody gave me an old kid trailer from, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. So I borrowed parts off of that, like the wheels and how it connects to the frame. I guess it'd be the axle, and I kind of made my own frame and everything for it. But I bought, in fact, here at Dayton, maybe 15 years ago, I got a set of those aluminum military tent poles to make a mast. Well, I used 2 sets of 2 with duct tape in the middle to join them together as a frame, and then I have a hitch on it. So I've got the wheels in the back, and then I have the hitch in the front, and then I put 2 big plastic totes on it. So that's what I'm using right now. It's just more or less a test, but it does the job. So this ride here is part of the Ohio to Erie, and yeah, this was day 4 on the first leg of the trip. And on this day, there was 26, a little under 27 miles. But if we look at our elevation, it's 1,138. So this was, for me, that was definitely a lot of miles or a lot of elevation over those miles for a day. So if I was route planning for me, then this would be something that I would try to stay away from that much elevation. But having that data to go back to and look at, I know in my mind, in my history, what this number was for me. So now we'll talk about the climbing index real fast. What that is essentially is you divide the elevation gain by the mileage. So you can do it for miles or kilometers. It only takes into account your average, though. So if you go back to the ride that I did where it was flat for quite a while and then it shot straight up, you're missing some of that information. So that's why I think it's more important to look at in detail the elevation profiles. And going back to ride with GPS, you can actually find that, because as you're doing that routing, as you make your line segments, it does show you what that is. So as far as actual numbers for a climbing index, for the Ohio to Erie trip, if you do that continuously and you just stay on the trail, that's 6,255 feet of elevation gain over 325 miles, or about a 19 with your climbing index. If you look at day 4 of my trip, that climbing index shot up to 42. So for me, yeah, that's on the high side. And then this I'm actually going to do live instead of on the slideshow. But this is I guess you could say it's the next trip that I have in the back of my mind that I want to do. When I will get to it, I don't know, because I thought I was going to do it last season too. Excuse me. So if we look at this this ride, you can see the elevation profile on this one does have some higher peaks on it. So the thing that catches my eye right off the bat is this higher peak. So I think that's like 23 or 25 miles. We're low on time?
We'll take a short break.
Yep.
And I'll bring him up.
Okay, yeah, we're going to take a quick shift of gears.
I'm going to take a real quick break. I'd like to bring up David King, who would like to talk about his cross-country trip. We'll give him a few minutes to talk. He's also written a book, and I told him he can promote the book as much as he wants. And then we'll go back to the other presentation. I don't know Dave very well. I just met him yesterday. I'll let him tell him about himself.
Hi, my name is David. Is the audio good, or should I? Sorry. I'm David, AA2KV. I grew up in New York. I now live in Chicago. So I rode my bicycle across the country from San Diego to Miami. It took about 3,600 miles, took me 4 months to do. And for those who are sort of geography nerds like I am, I can tell you that I went from San Diego across to El Centro, California, over to Yuma, Arizona, Phoenix, Tucson, Wilcox, over to Lordsburg, New Mexico, Deming, Las Cruces, El Paso, Texas, Marfa, Alpine, San Antonio, up to Austin, Houston, over to Beaumont, Orange, then over to Lake Charles, Louisiana, Lafayette, New Orleans, Gulfport, Biloxi, Mississippi, Mobile, Alabama, and Pensacola, Florida, over to Tallahassee, down to Tampa, Clearwater, Fort Myers, across over to Clewiston, and then somehow, I'm not sure how, through the Florida Everglades, over to Boca Raton, Deerfield Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and Miami. So it was an amazing trip. I'm really grateful for all the kindness I received from people along the way. And if anyone wants to nerd out about that, I'm happy to talk to you and give you details. I do have a book that I've written called America on Two Wheels, Biking Coast to Coast in Search of Human Stories, about the interesting people I met along the way. So if you'd like that, we're all friends here. If you'd like an ebook copy, I'll send you an ebook copy for free. If you'd like a hard book copy, I can give it to you for cost. But I'm also up here because I'd like to get inspired from you all, because you all are here because you're into bicycling and ham radio. I have a Yaesu FT530 dual band HT that I mount on the handlebar, either with a speaker mic or a boom headset. I even was able to wire in an external PTT that you loop around the handlebar and just press with your thumb. But I'd like to learn from you, and I'd like to get inspired for the next generation. I do want to upgrade to digital. I don't know much about the modes. So if you all have any opinions on DMR versus D-Star versus Fusion, whatever it is, I'd like to learn from you. Bluetooth earpiece, headset, Bluetooth PTT, any of that stuff, even some kind of portable HF unit and an antenna I could mount on the back. So I'd love to talk to you in person when we have some time. So if you have any questions, otherwise we can just speak in person later. So thanks.
Where's Mike? How much time do we have? About 20 minutes? Okay. There it is. Okay, so we left off with the 145-mile 4-day loop that I've got in the works here in the future. But again, going back to this higher peak on the elevation chart, that's really what catches my attention. And if we zoom in on that, then what we have is 671 feet of elevation over 28.5 miles. So I know that that's based on my history again, and everybody's history is going to be a little bit different. But for me, that elevation over those miles, that would be a tough day, but it'd be doable. But what I want to know is, what does the day prior look like? Because am I going to have one heavy day, or am I going to have 2 heavy days back to back? So we're looking at the same thing pretty much. on the day before at just under 29 miles and a little over 600 feet of elevation. So I know as I even begin thinking about that particular trip that there's going to be a couple of heavy-duty days in there that are probably going to take me some time to get through. Yes. Good question. Sometimes those are bridges where the elevation data actually drops down to whatever the bottom is in that area, or it's just a glitch in the system. I think most of the time, as it shows up here, if it's uniform like that, it's usually a glitch in the system. But that's a good question, because if you look at the gap, the Great Allegheny Passage, they have tunnels. You see the same thing that go through the tunnels because they don't have the peak of the mountain that they're actually going through and not up and over. The bike computer will still track the data because you still have the computer or the sensors on your bike. So you will lose the GPS component, but it's still keeping track of your cadence, speed, and distance and those metrics. So with the time that we have left, I'll go through a couple of pictures of the Ohio to Erie trip I did and some of the gear that I take. This is a collage of not exactly every day's ride on my trip, but that kind of gives you an idea of the southern point, the northern point. I did miss going through Columbus because I diverted, and that's where I was riding in and out of, was northwest Franklin County. So I did my trip over two sections. I went up north first, and then it took about a week off, and then I went down south and did the southern route. So I'll just go ahead and pull up some pictures here. And like I said, this presentation is kind of an adventure. I didn't really rehearse a whole lot other than jotting some notes down and whatnot. So as far as pictures, we're just gonna let it roll. If I can find them. So before I even took off, I did a test ride. It was, I don't know, 15, 20 miles. And I was just experimenting with hanging gear on the bike and what to take. I got to talk about that. So when I started riding, I was using platform pedals. I didn't have any clips that would attach my feet to the pedals. I guess they're technically called clipless. But I was pushing on the pedals, and all that did was build up the muscles and tendons on the top of my legs. I didn't balance everything out. Ended up with pretty bad knee issues because those muscles and tendons pulled my kneecaps off to the sides. So I went through 6 or 8 weeks of physical therapy to try to straighten things out, switched to the clipless pedals with the shoes that attach to the pedals. And that's one of the things that keeps me able to ride and go long distances. That doesn't mean that I don't have to still do some maintenance. That's what this is. If you're familiar with foam rollers and rolling out muscles and tendons, I just did the same thing with some foam packing over top of an Nalgene bottle just to kind of condense everything and have a multi-use tool with me. So I would do that every day. At night, in the evening, I'd find just an open spot on the trail and I'd roll my IT bands out. And that's what kept my legs in good shape. That was an experiment with the antenna on there. The main radio that I use on the bike as I'm going is a Yaesu VX6R dual bander. And in this setup, I just had a dual band whip on there, which when I went on my ride, I changed that out for a quarter wave. And you can see the ground plane on there, so it's just a couple of quarter wave radials. And you always have to be aware that you may have gear issues. In fact, Rebecca and I were riding last week and that same thing happened. Bolt came out of the pannier. I did add a mirror to the bike before I went on my trip just so I could see behind me. But as it turned out, that was one of the upgrades I did on the second leg of the trip, was I extended this out about another 8 inches. Because the stuff on the bike was blocking the view of the mirror, so I needed to get around that. I did ride in cold weather because it was in October and November, so I had some cold temperatures to deal with. And I made these goofy aluminum plates that zip tie to my shoes that have the SPD clip on them, so I could use my winter hiking boots and still attach them to the pedals. And again, that's as goofy as it looks, it works like a champ. I rode all but maybe 1 or 2 days of all my trips with those boots, and it worked out fantastic. Just some of the food that I took, a solar panel that I was trying to rig up to tent poles. I actually didn't use this on the trip because I ended up using the tent so much I needed the poles. So it was just, it was too much to try to ride and have that going at the same time. That's part of the system I showed a couple years ago, my portable power system. This was the first night. I'll talk about this actually. That's my coffee brewing method. I use a plastic water bottle, coffee filter, and a zip tie, and then I just put the grounds in it. I used to make big tea bags. I stapled the coffee filter shut with the coffee in it, and that actually was a little bit more work as far as dishes go because you're making the coffee in the pot. This keeps the dishes down because you can just boil water and then all your messes there in the bottle and the coffee filter. So that's why I like that method. And you can just, this, a lot of times just trail side, to be honest with you. I just, it goes back to how far I can ride in a day. So just, it depends on what the area is and what, you know, you wouldn't want to be necessarily doing that on a park bench all the time, but if you got to a particular spot and that was your option.
I just thought it might be something different than what I do.
Yep. One of the neat things about trips like this too is, of course, being in the outdoors. I always enjoy being in the outdoors. There you can see the sun coming up in the first morning. And of course, I had to harvest some photons. And then pancakes in the morning for breakfast. That square skillet actually was my great-grandpa's, so it has a lot of sentimental value. I enjoy taking that on all my camping trips. Then my recliner chair, that's awesome. This is my meter that shows the solar output. So we were running about 13.5 volts, just under an amp of charge current, or 13.3 watts. So that wasn't too bad. Sometimes I can get up to, in really hot sun, I can get up to about 1.5 amps. But an amp, that's on a good day, that's good. This is just an example of the bike with all the gear on it. So I did have quite a bit of stuff.
How much does all that weigh?
If I was to guess, on a resupply day, if I had a couple of jugs of water too, probably close to 200. So that's actually an interesting point. One of the important things about doing the test ride before is knowing how to attach the gear and making those adjustments so you can actually ride the bike. If you have if you have the weight too high, it's off balance. The bigger issue is you can actually get the wobble going on in your steering. So if you try to get that weight down low, it actually stabilizes things really nice. What's weird is when you get used to riding the bike with all the stuff on it, when you set up camp and then you go to the porta-john in the camp, downways a little bit with an empty bike, you can't hardly ride an empty bike because you're so used to jerking that thing around and you throw yourself right off of it. Been there, done that. That was just one of the pavilions that was next to the trail. And then another day I was set up there, I had my laptop and my AC power inverter, running the computer off my solar. I'll just expand that out. Okay, I did want to point this out too and correlate that to, I believe, Ride with GPS. Because this is one of those high peaks that you see on the trail. Actually, we'll go out to Strava. We'll see, we'll do a live example of the data collection on Strava. October 18th. So here's the data output from that same file on the bike computer we were looking at a second ago. And you can see right here on the map in the elevation chart, that's where that high peak was. So it is kind of interesting. Again, like I said, we're going on an adventure this morning together here. When I look back at the data, this is that hill on the trail, and then cresting it. And you can see that on the bike computer. And there's our total elevation at that point in time. And this is one of the other spots I stopped. One of the interesting things in this trip is how wet it was. It rained pretty much all but maybe 3 or 4 days of the time I was out. So I took 2 shelters with me. I had the tent, which is the blue thing, and then I had a hammock, and the tarp, or the cover for the hammock, is what I use most of the time as my garage for the bike. I also use that as a cook shack in the morning or in the evening to brew up dinner and lunch. So there's my protected camp setup. And then when I packed up that morning, that's everything on the bike, all nice and soaked, including me. And this is part of the road section around Apple Creek. I guess that's south of Dalton. But it was misty and pea soup that entire day, and as you can see, lots of hills. So that's what it was pretty much that entire day. And then I ran into this interesting road closure. I thought, let me at least ride down there and see if I can find a way through. And this is in Amish country, and one of the interesting things about the Amish, at least in Ohio, a lot of them have adopted the idea of electric bicycles. So you see a lot of them out there riding bikes. And I actually, I didn't realize that, and I thought a couple of them were bike tourers also. Time? Okay. Well, I guess that is going to be it for the presentation that I had. So real quick, I will put one last slide up that has my information if anybody wants to check things out at a later time. If you have questions, email me or check out my YouTube channel. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve and Dave, for a great program. I wish we could have had another hour, but I couldn't get it. So we will see you either on the air, on the trails, or next year, if I'm still here. Thanks all for coming. I will be at the back door if anybody is interested in the CDs of that I've got up here. I'll just be at the back door so I can let the other people come in. Thanks again. Everybody have a safe trip home. I'll be in the back. I've been doing this for like
You've convinced me. I'm going to continue riding the way I do and not follow your way.
There you go. Do it your way. That's what it's all about. Get out there and get some exercise.
When you do silly things like ride Skyline, drive both ways in one day,
Yeah.
you realize that, well, riding unencumbered is an advantage. I gotta go ahead and see how many articles I can find.
Is that laptop yours or is this?
Yeah, that's mine. That's theirs.
1, 2, 3, checkity 1, 7, 8, 9, 12. That's about as high as I can count. Are we good? All right. Probably don't want to be too far away. It was the same way yesterday. If I got a little bit away from it, these are very directional. Oh, I see. I thought this was a Shure. It's not. It's a Behringer. This microphone it must be related to my Kenwood car radio. It wants to be about a ½ inch away from my mouth. Checkity 1, 2, 1, 2. Buckle my shoe.
That's it.
Oh, great. We're rocking now.
Are you going to computer on that? Okay. All right. It says till 11:30. Okay. I don't think there's anything after that except for getting set up for the private call. More likely. Okay. Sounds good.
Hardly anybody ever objects to that, so. I do talk about that, but very briefly. Morning. Remote operation, I think, is over there.
So I suspect this is a one that says the front. I'm sure that it's not remote.
Oh, now I understand what has happened. No, that fellow didn't make it.
Okay.
I'll speak briefly about remote operation, but not enough.
Not about the equipment that required.
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, who you really want to talk to is radio system. I think that's it. And they're here at the show.
Maybe they are today. I saw a lot of them packing up yesterday.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Take care.
All right, I think this is our crowd. So, hi, good morning, everybody. I know there's lots of stuff to do here and lots of programs to see, and so thanks for choosing to be here. I really do appreciate it. I'm Michael Burnett. I'm AF7KB, and I'm the author of a series of comprehensive license training programs called the Fast Track books, as well as some supporting workbooks and others. And I'm also the narrator of our audio programs. Now, if you are a grizzled veteran of the HF bands, that's Marconi, and your ham shack walls are already like papered with QSL cards and DX awards, you're probably in the wrong room. You're welcome to stay, honestly, but it's probably not going to be anything really new for you here. For the rest of you, my plan is to spend about the next 49.62 minutes going over some practical basics about getting started in the HF side of amateur radio. We'll talk about building your first HF station, and we'll touch on some HF modes and operating procedures as well. So, let's start with building an HF station. Some of the choices that are ahead of you. I think it's safe to say that there are no two amateur radio stations that are exactly alike. Every one of them is unique and created in response to a number of factors, like the ham's operating goals, the operating site, which is really critical, and the ham's budget, also critical. Sometimes they're also the product of what I'd call ham lore. Now, ham lore is that misinformation that you find all over those fountains of wisdom known as Facebook and YouTube and similar things. Some quick basics. When we talk about HF, we're talking about the high-frequency bands, those below the 6-meter band. Primarily, those are the 160 through 10-meter bands. There are a couple of more bands that are way down there below 160 meters, but for the moment, those are primarily experimental, and you won't find them on commercial HF transceivers, not even in the HF bands. And yes, I do know that I should speak of the 160-meter band as being medium frequency, or MF, but in casual ham speak, all those bands are the HF bands. Now, the HF bands are the worldwide communication bands. They propagate over long distances, we hope, mostly with the help of the ionosphere. The condition of the ionosphere varies with the condition of the sun. For us, the best indicator of the condition of the sun is the presence or absence of sunspots. Those things. More sunspots generally equals better propagation. Sunspots vary in their frequency on a 22-year cycle, with peaks every 11 years, we hope. You've probably heard we have been for some time in one of the valleys of the sunspot cycle. And you may have even heard that the HF bands are dead. Bet you have. Well, first, some good news. No matter what you may have heard, the HF bands are not dead. They smell a little funny, but they're not dead. It's true that we're in the bottom, or maybe just past the bottom of the sunspot cycle, and it's also true that HF propagation is certainly not what it will be when the sunspots start appearing in greater numbers. However, there haven't been many days at my station, which is, by the way, absolutely not anything special, when I couldn't make some kind of contacts somehow. So far as I know, the ARRL continues to send out those DX Century Club awards and those Worked All States awards. Now, propagation conditions have been, at least for a while, will continue to be challenging. I won't say the bands are alive and well, but they are alive. It just takes a little more persistence to get things done. And I did a whole presentation on propagation yesterday, and one of the key points I made is, you read that propagation prediction, this deal, right? Well, it's looked about like that or worse for most of the last 10 or 11 years. And yet, DXCC worked all states and all that. So that forecast, that prediction, which is a neat little creation by a guy named Paul Herman, tells you about the climate of the ionosphere, okay? And we're good at predicting climate. Climate is, we've got a pretty good handle on that science. But predicting the propagation from your house to Indonesia is like predicting the weather. And weather's different from climate, and predicting the propagation from your house to Indonesia is different from predicting the overall condition of the ionosphere. So that's why it takes some persistence to make those contacts. Here's a recent propagation forecast. You can see this was not a great day for any kind of propagation above 40 meters. It says right there, 80 to 40, day, fair, night, good, 30 to 20, poor, 17 to 15, poor, 12 to 10, poor, 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 poor. And we've been, if you've seen that widget, you've seen that in the last 10 years. And yet, take a look. At the moment I took the picture of that propagation forecast, I switched over to dxmaps.com, which is a fun site, and this is the DX that was happening at that very moment on the 20-meter band where supposedly, and by the way, this is during the day, our day, supposedly poor propagation, and yet look at all those contacts going on, and that's just the ones that were reported to DX Maps. So don't put too much faith in those propagation forecasts. Don't get discouraged. The best propagation forecast is the one you create when you turn on that microphone and go CQ, CQ, CQ. Now, there's plenty of fun to be had on the HF bands. Doesn't take a 100-foot tower festooned with exotic and expensive antennas on it either. It doesn't have to be connected to the world's greatest radio. Getting on the HF bands vastly expands your ham radio world if you've been playing on the VHF, UHF bands. It expands it geographically, and it expands it operationally. Got a lot more toys to play with. On HF, there's a much wider variety of activities. Obviously, there's CW and SSB phone, lots of each. There's also quite a selection of HF digital modes, some of which have become enormously popular, at least for the moment, in response to propagation conditions. You can have interesting conversations with people all over the world, or you can go for awards like Worked All States or DX Century Club, or you can be a county hunter, or I mean, there's a million awards you can go for. There are lots of contests of all sorts. If you're a contester, almost every weekend has at least one contest going. If you enjoy nets, just chatting with a bunch of folks, there are plenty of those to choose from across the HF bands of all sorts. Each band tends to kind of take on its own character. That's partly because of how the frequencies are affected by propagation conditions, and partly just by the semi-random assortment of folks who hang out on those bands. So let me ask you, what is it you want to do on the HF bands? I know. Oh, yeah, I get it. Mr. Burnett, it's kind of why I came to your little presentation today, was I was trying to figure that out. I get it. It's a big smorgasbord. And the truth is, you're not going to know what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy until you get in there and you try a few of these things. You just cannot tell by looking in from the outside. When I first heard about this digital mode called FT8, I mean, you heard of FT8? Yeah, okay. I got to be honest with you. I thought it was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard of. Not just in ham radio, but ever, of anything. I mean, really? FT8? Totally not for me. I mean, look at me, I'm a talker, right? It's very limited in the messages it can send. It's like a chat program that's really dumb. Okay, it can only send CQ and my call sign and your call sign and a signal report and 7-3. That's it. Dumb. But I write these license courses, and I kind of needed to know about this in order to write the license course. So, okay, I get out my old laptop and I download the software and I hook it up to the radio, which was not easy because my radio dates from, well, let's put it this way, it remembers when John Travolta could dance. And I get it hooked up and I start the software and I'm FT8, and 2.5 hours later, my wife says, "Are we going to have dinner or what?" I mean, I just got totally hooked. So from the outside, it looked dumb. I got in, I started playing with it. It was really fun. So, you don't know. Since you're starting off on your journey, let's think in terms of a station that will let you experiment with a lot of HF modes and find out what lights you up. Let's add to that, too, that we do this at a reasonably modest level of expense and inconvenience, so you're not in over your head before you even get started. And now, do understand, when I say modest expense, I'm not talking about $1.98, okay? Takes a little money to play this game. It doesn't have to be a fortune, but it does take a little money. So by the time you get into this, you can have a lot less into it than these two knuckleheads have into their bicycles and bike gears. That's my son, that's my son-in-law. I know how much that stuff costs. They have the carbon fiber and the fancy sweat thing, bench, I don't know what it all is, but you can build a great HF station for a lot less than what those guys have into their bicycling hobby. Let's specify that yours is going to be a station that's capable of operating multiple bands, and since it's well within reach, let's aim for everything from 80 meters through 10 meters. 160 meters is kind of its own animal, and we'll set that aside for the moment, especially its own animal when it comes to antennas, but you can play with that later. 80 through 10 is going to get you a lot of action. Now, we're going to go with modest power. We're going to say 100 watts. QRP operation, low power operation, can be a lot of fun. It's a great aspect of the hobby. It's probably not the best place to start. If you want to get into it later, great. And it can be absolutely amazing. QRO operation, high power operation with a big amplifier, is also something you don't need to get into at this point. That can come later when you have your antenna and your operating skills put together. Look, you take a big old amplifier, there are some great ones, you stick it on a bad antenna, nothing great is going to happen. So you're going to learn about antennas as you go, and you're going to learn your operating procedures. Then if you want to crank up the power to 1500 watts, good for you, go for it. Now we'll talk more about transceivers, but with these specifications, just about any mainstream, all-mode, all-band HF transceiver made in the last 2 decades is going to do the job just fine for you. So let's start with what can be the most physically challenging item, and that is your HF antenna. You ask any experienced HF operator, they will tell you that antenna is the single most important piece of equipment in your station. To some extent, your choice of HF antenna is going to be inevitably dictated by the space available to install it and other issues related to that space, like your HOA if you have one. If you have a few acres of land with some very tall trees, no neighbors around for miles, no homeowners association to deal with, and an unlimited budget, well, you have a lot more possibilities than someone on a tight budget in a rented apartment with no land and a landlord who is rabidly anti-antenna. If you have the space, if you have the space and some tall trees or something else tall to hang on to hang a long wire antenna, that's how I'd suggest you go. You can buy commercial versions of all kinds of popular designs of long wire antennas. And if you're even a little bit handy, they're simple enough to construct. Now, I won't say they are effortless to put up, but they are not a major construction project. Okay, you're not going to be having a conversation about how much 9 yards of concrete costs to have delivered into the giant hole you dug in the ground to mount your huge tower. It's a matter of hanging a couple of pieces of wire off a couple of pieces of rope from something that's well off of the ground. Long wires strung on trees are very stealthy, too. You have to really look to see a long wire antenna strung up in the air. Little hint for you, those of you who might be dealing with neighborhood issues. There are 3 basic configurations for long wire antennas. There are flat tops, slopers, and inverted V's. So the flat topper looks like a lot of the pictures you saw in your license manuals, a more or less horizontal wire. In this one, the feed point's in the center, but that could also be at either end, or even at a place somewhere between the center and the end, and each of those designs changes your impedance and your loading and all those things. So a copy of the League's antenna book is a wonderful thing to have when you jump into this. If you don't want the antenna book, which is about this thick, they also have specialty books just on long wire antennas, okay? Again, these are pretty simple to construct. Here's a sloper. This runs from a lower spot to a higher spot. Usually that works out to be from the eaves of your house up to some tall object like a tree. Now again, this can be center-fed or off-center-fed. I suspect that most of them are end-fed just because of the physical layout of things. It's sort of a problem that it solves. Inverted V's run from a lower spot to a higher spot and then back down to a lower spot. Now these are good if you're short horizontally, so you string out lots of wire and make a long wire by just raising the middle, basically. There are a few multiband long wire designs that you can choose from. All right, there are end-fed designs, there are off-center fed designs, there are trapped designs, all kinds of designs out there. One popular one that covers a lot of bands is called the G5RV. And you can buy these ready-made from the suppliers. This one happens to be made by MFJ. Or you can make one yourself with some wire, that's that part, and some ladder line, or it's also known as window line, that's this part, and with a choke ballon, that's this part here. That's important. That helps match it to your transceiver. Really not a hard thing to construct. Now, when you go to put it up, it does need a tuner to operate properly. It's about 102 feet long. Now remember, you can put it in an inverted V or as a sloper, and you don't have to have a lot that's 102 feet long in order to make this work. It can be a flat top or sloper or inverted V. The center needs to be at least 35 feet above the ground. That is not much. You think about an 80-meter straight half-wave dipole, it's got to be up 130 feet to really work well. The G5RV only needs to be up about 35, so that can be a lot less challenging than 132. The lowest points need to be at least 25 feet above the ground. So if you make that inverted V, you can have the 35 feet here or more, and at least 25. Now, higher is almost always better with antennas. That's just as close to an ironclad rule as anything in ham radio. Height is might. So higher is gooder. As you get it higher, by the way, it gets a lot easier to tune. If you have a big chunk of land with several tall objects around it, you have to have several near the perimeter, you might consider a horizontal loop antenna. You'll need 3 or 4 or more, good size, ideally say 40 feet tall, trees or a barn or whatever other tall things you have on your property that are spaced a healthy distance apart. So it ends up looking something like this. I have a friend who put one of these up a few years ago. He has the big tower with the 9 yards of concrete and the big tribander up on top. And one day put himself up a horizontal loop around his property, and he hasn't put a single electron through that tribander since then. He loves his horizontal loop because it works all the bands, and it's a tremendous reception antenna. It's a great receive antenna for him. So that can be a great antenna if you have the space. The length of that antenna needs to be one wavelength of the lowest frequency for which you are building it. If you have room to string out 160 meters of wire, you have an antenna that will work 160 meters through 6 meters. That's about 550 feet of wire, by the way. We're aiming for 80 meters and up for you, so you'll need to string at least 275 feet of wire. Now, a horizontal loop is not terribly picky about its exact shape. It can be square, it can be round, it can be a triangle. It doesn't much care. The idea, though, is to enclose as much space with it as possible. It isn't picky about height either. Higher is always better, but there are reports of some that are installed as low as 10 or 20 feet up. By all reports, they're working. Now, are there long wire antenna designs that are different from the ones I've described? Sure. But given the parameters we've chosen here, is it worth spending days and days researching them? If you're interested in that kind of thing, maybe. But honestly, you're not going to find anything that's dramatically more efficient or, directive than what we've talked about here. What's important for you at this stage, I want you to focus here, is get on the air and start learning and experimenting. This isn't going to be your last setup. You got to face that. This is not going to be the last station you build. You can optimize your setup later when you've learned a whole bunch and you know where you want to focus. If you put up, say you decide, you know what, I really dig 40 meters, CW. That's what I love. All right. You don't need that G5RV anymore. You can put up a much more efficient, straight 40-meter half-wave dipole, and you're going to have a lot more efficient and effective antenna for that band. We're designing so that you can play on all the bands and find out what you like. Optimization, I talked some about yesterday. look, optimum is not required for ham radio. Optimum is optional. Suboptimum is what most of us have, and suboptimum is just fine if it gets you on the air and you're enjoying yourself. The basics of putting up long wires are really pretty simple. Your objective is simply to safely get a hunk or two of wire up in the air as far as you can, separated from the supports by insulators. The ends should be supported by non-conductive material. If you put conductive material up there, even though it's insulated, it still becomes part of the antenna and it throws off your tuning. So you want just some rope hanging this thing up. You'll want to rig the ends, or at least one end, on some sort of a system that lets you raise and lower the antenna, because you're going to fiddle around with tuning this thing for a while and need to do some trimming. If you're using a tree or two, there are any number of ways to get those support ropes up in the upper reaches of the trees. None of them involves imagining that you can climb trees. You hearing me? None of them require that. You leave that to the cats and to the people who get paid to do that sort of thing. If you're handy with a fishing rod, you can cast a lead weight over a tall branch, using fishing line to pull up a stouter rope or some paracord, and then use the stouter rope to support the antenna. People have been known to tie a fishing line to the arrow of a bow and arrow and get the job done. It's probably a good time to say safety first. Watch what's on the other side. One of our club members almost killed a cop car one day when we were setting up for field day. Fired our air gun with a weight over it and missed the cop car parked over there by about that far. Look what's on the other side. This is the air-powered gun, by the way. You can see these advertised in the back pages of QST just about every month. And that fires a spherical fishing weight. This is, frankly, a device that should not be nearly as much fun as it is. So there is some fun to putting up antennas. You know, and I want you to consider that too. Look, a lot of the people I talk to is like they look at setting up a station as this sort of drudgery that they have to do before they get to the fun stuff of operating. But listen, we're ham radio operators. Setting up a station can be a lot of fun. So think of it as fun, and then you'll do it, and then you'll get to play on the air. Nylon packing twine will work just fine if you're putting up a temporary installation. That's what we use for field day every year. For something more permanent, you will want some Dacron rope that the dealers will happily sell you that's rated for exterior use. Otherwise, you get the surprise of having your antenna fall down. Be sure you hang your antenna so that there is some slack in it. You don't want to pull it tight. The wind is going to blow. Now, a lot of times when I tell people who are new to this about how easy it is to put up a long wire antenna and how very little there really is to it, they give me this look like, can't be that simple. It's got to be a trick. But it's not. It really can be that simple. This is our club. We usually put together a field operation every year for 7QP, the Region 7 QSO party, and that's kind of our warm-up for field day, which is coming up. And one of our favorite field antennas is our fan dipole. Now, if you don't know, a fan dipole is, in this case, 3 dipoles. You take a 40-meter half-wave dipole, and then you have a, what do we have? We have a 20, a 40, and an 80, I think. Yeah. And so it looks like a fan, and they're kind of connected by insulators. And we string that thing up. We hang it off a tree. We hang the other end off of the tower that you see here, which is not in its up position yet. That's our tower trailer, by the way. Pretty cool, huh? With some helpers, it usually takes less than an hour and a half to set up the whole thing. Now, honestly, if we had fewer helpers, could probably do it in an hour. But, you know, people like to play. Now, a little hint, by the way, for any of you who are in ham clubs, and if you are not in a ham club, I need to talk to you afterwards because you don't seem to understand that one of the main reasons you got your license was so you could join a ham club. That's my pitch for ham clubs. You can accomplish a huge amount of antenna building in a very short time with a couple of 16-inch pizzas and a cooler full of beverages. I will leave the selection of beverages up to you. Now, nothing tall around your house, is that your problem, Bunky? I have the same problem. I live in Washington State. You would think I would have some huge tall trees to hang stuff off of, but nope, not in my neighborhood. I'm in the same boat as you. There's nothing even close to high enough to make a decent long wire antenna. I do, however, have a decent sized backyard, so we're putting up a vertical. That happens to be a 0.5 43-foot vertical. Now, it's possible to homebrew a vertical HF antenna, but there is no getting around the fact that they present more difficult engineering problems to solve. And that's both electronic engineering and mechanical engineering, or civil engineering, I guess. They do have to stand up. And to stand up even in stiff winds. By the time you scare up all the various parts you need to assemble a multi-band vertical, in most cases, you're probably going to save money, time, and frustration by just ordering one of the commercial antennas. HF verticals are just about universally quarter-wave vertical antennas with loading coils. A true half-wave 80-meter vertical would be 132 feet tall. That's a lot of aluminum to convince to stand up, even with guy wires. Quarter wave antennas are a lot more practical. But because they're quarter wave antennas, they typically require some sort of counterpoise or ground radials in order to work. This particular one, this 43-foot 0.5, takes ground radials all around the base, and his basic recommendation is the more the better. That's typical with radials. So that's basically a 43-foot tall aluminum whip with ground radials all around the base. Now this is a high-gain DX88. It's 25 feet tall, so shorter. Covers 80 through 10 meters. That 43-footer covers 160 through 10 meters. Now, I just had a chance to see one of these in action and to compare it on several bands with a dipole and a tribander Yagi that was up on a big tower. Got to tell you, this one was a little bit noisier, but it was at times outperforming the other antennas. It was neck and neck. This was a field operation, so the radials for this, we just stretched out some wire on the lawn around it. In your backyard, you can just stretch out those wires and tack them down with turf staples, okay? You don't have to bury all your radials. I've heard people say, I don't know how I'm going to bury all these radials. Just tack them down with turf staples, and the lawn will grow up around them. If you want to be real technical, mow your lawn short before you do this, but you don't even really have to do that. So just turf staples. Here is a radial plate. You'll need one of these for the base of your vertical. That goes down at the base, and that's where you connect all those radial wires. I own one of these. In fact, I think that one's mine. And the guy who makes them sells them on eBay. He's a machinist. That DX88 that we were using was a ground-mounted antenna. Other HF verticals you can put up on the roof. And there are some that advertise that they don't need radials. From what I hear, they even those work better if you stretch out some radials, and you can just stretch them out across your roof. This is a Cushcraft R9. The scuttlebutt is this one still needs radials, even though you can see, it looks an awful lot like radials, doesn't it? That brings us to the topic of stealth antennas. There are still plenty of zoning ordinances and homeowners association regulations out there that forbid or drastically limit what sorts of antennas, if any, we can put on our property. However, there is still hope. There are lots and lots of ideas on the web for stealth antennas. Some of them are good. Here are a few of the more common solutions. Now, by the way, far be it from me to suggest that you act in some underhanded or deceptive way in order to skirt these very important regulations. So consider this next part just for entertainment purposes. Most towns and HOAs don't forbid flagpoles. That would be downright patriotic, right? Look very closely at this handsome 30-foot flagpole here, and you may notice some suspicious bulges. Well, I don't know for sure, but those could be loading coils and traps. That's 05's 30-foot flagpole antenna. Now, if you can't get away with that, you're not really trying with your HOA. So that's one way to go. It's a dandy little antenna, too. If you have some long lengths of plastic rain gutter around your place, you can sneak an end-fed half-wave wire antenna into the gutters, even if it has to turn a corner or two. It'll still work. If you have aluminum gutters, well, I happen to know for a fact that not too far from my home, it's not my house, but not too far away, there is a set of aluminum gutters that is radiating just great right down to 40 meters almost every night. Takes a little ingenuity, and it probably takes some testing, but it absolutely can be done. Tell me that isn't stealth. I've seen that work. Now, say you live in a high-rise apartment or a condo. If there's a balcony, you can stick a ham stick. You can get those from any of the dealers. They're one-band antennas. Or you can get a screwdriver antenna that's an adjustable HF antenna. You adjust the length on that deal, basically, the loading coil. And you stick that out on your balcony. You need a counterpoise? Look, some wire fell off of the balcony and strung down there, which you pull back up when you're done operating. If you have a high enough balcony, you don't even need the ham stick or the stealth antenna. You just feed the wire out over the balcony. We had a club member, bless his heart, we just lost him. He was a character. He traveled all over the world, and he had his Elecraft KXE and his little bitty Elecraft CW key, and he carried the amplifier too, and a roll of wire. Wherever he was, out the window, and he worked the world. He also set the hotel on fire one night, but that's another story. He swore he had no idea what had happened. Now, do you have a big attic? You can stick a long wire up there. You might have to double it back a couple of times. Okay, now it's a folded dipole. It's not going to be optimum, but it can work so long as everything is wood up there. If you have a metal roof, you're out of luck on an attic antenna. If you go the attic antenna route, please remember, your antenna is carrying some very high voltage. Even at 100 watts, the ends of that antenna have very high voltage. So observe proper precautions. The League publishes a whole book of stealth antennas. Well worth the investment if it saves your house from burning down, wouldn't you say? Or there's the magnetic loop antenna. This one's from Alpha Antennas, who are here at the show. There are others. They're pretty easy to build for yourself, right up to the moment that you try to find that, which is a high voltage variable capacitor of the correct size. Those are really rare. That's the hang-up with building it. Other than that, it's just two pieces of coax. The little loop there is what carries the signal from the transceiver, and that induces a signal in the big loop. This one will go down to 80 meters, by the way, because it has the extra loop there. They're not the most efficient antennas in the world, but they do work. They get used on DXpeditions all the time. That's just almost standard issue for the DXpeditions. Magnetic loops will work effectively just 36 inches off the ground, too. You can mount one on a tripod, stick it out on your patio, and operate worldwide without the HOA ever catching on. And besides, they wouldn't have any case anyway, because that's not a permanent installation. You can pull pretty much the same trick with a buddy pole, which is what we often operate off of. We stick it on our patio and away we go. Haven't got that vertical mounted yet. You can put, this one, whoops. One more possibility. And this one is if you have none of the possibilities I've mentioned so far, and that is remote operation. If you have internet access and a couple of pieces of the right equipment and or software, you can operate a rig remotely, such as a club rig. A friend of mine has been a ham since 1951. 1951. That's the year I was born. He was already a ham. He recently moved into a living situation where there's simply no room for any sort of antenna. No problem. He became a member of a club that has a remote controllable station, and he operates that way. Now, I'm not going to go into all the intricacies of setting up a remote control system because there are a lot of ways to skin that particular cat. My apologies to cat owners. Obviously, the radio being controlled has to have computer control capability. One system works directly from your computer by running some software, like the Ham Radio Deluxe remote control server. You end up with that operating from a screen that looks like this. That's the screen of your computer, and you can see it's laid out basically to imitate a radio, okay? And you operate any rig you want that's hooked up to the system with that. There's a company now, I can't remember their name, but it's something like Remote Radio Incorporated or Remote Ham or something. They will sell you a membership in their club, and you can then operate any of their super stations, big amplifiers, big tower, big antenna, that are located all around the country. It's not inexpensive, okay? I wouldn't tell you it's pocket change. And it's around $1,000 a year, and you get access to all their equipment. So there's really nothing stopping you from getting on HF. All right, now we're gonna go radio shopping. But before we do, let's talk briefly about your feed line. Now, what I'm about to say borders on ham lore heresy, so shield your delicate ears if you're going to collapse or something, but here we go. It is perfectly possible to have a working feed line made of that RG6 75 ohm coax cable that you can buy at Lowe's or Home Depot for about $30 for a 100-foot roll. It will work. Michael, that means I'm going to have an automatic 1.5 to 1 SWR. I know. So what? 1.5 to 1 SWR translates to 0.18 dB of loss. That means about 4% of your power. If the rest of your antenna system is well matched to 75 ohms, which will take some work and some more expense, you're probably going to get more signal to your antenna than half the HF operators at this convention. However, by the time you buy some conduit in which to install that non-variable stuff, and you buy the connectors, and you buy the matching gear that you're going to need at the antenna end and probably at the transmitter end, you're going to be into the deal at least 70 or 80, 90, 100 bucks. Our friends over at DX Engineering, disclaimer, they gave me a hat on the way over here, so I'm corrupted. They will happily make you a 100-foot length of their 400 max low-loss, double-shielded coax, complete with professionally installed PL259s on either end. And folks, installing those connectors is where things can go horribly awry. So getting those professionally installed until you develop that expertise is a really good idea. $119.99 with free shipping. So for 20 bucks more than you were going to waste on a really crummy setup, you can have the deluxe stuff. Don't sabotage your station by shortcutting your feed line. It's really important. If you, by the way, remember to order some waterproofing goo for your connectors, which you do want, and you order it at the same time as your conduit, you'll even get free shipping on that. Now, I imagine that Gigaparts and HRO and MFJ will all just as cheerfully make you similar deals on similar products. If you have a shorter run than 100 feet, good for you. You got it handled for even less. Now, there is the small matter of how to get their feed line into your ham shack, and this can be quite a challenge. Now, of course, you can go with the time-honored drill a hole in the wall and feed the thing through. Some people are hesitant about that. Some folks don't feel comfortable drilling and sawing and all that stuff on their home for some reason. So for them, here's one clever solution. This happens to come from MFJ. This is a panel. It's a connector panel, and this is the outside of it. The inside is a mirror of this. It has a bunch of connectors. It even has a ground connector for your ground to pass through. This comes mounted on a handsome cedar board. You measure your window, whichever way your window goes. You saw that board to the correct length. It even has weather strip that comes with it. You put the board in the window, you shut the window, you're done. You have now built a pass-through for your feed line into your house. Really, it's a less than an hour project, and if you're renting or you just don't want to make holes in your house, well, when you're done, unscrew your cables and away you go. Now, this one sells for about 70 bucks. Count the $5 connectors on there, and remember that there are connectors on the other side, and I don't know how much that one costs, but then, you know, you need a nice, handsome aluminum panel. You're not going to be able to build that for 70 bucks. It's very slick. Now, let's go radio shopping, the sexy part. Modern HF radios are certainly amazing things. Here's one now. That's the ICOM IC7851. Is that not dazzling? Is that not beautiful? That's handsome. It's a beautiful piece of technology. It does amazing things, and it costs about $12,500, unless you catch it on sale. Look at the knobs and buttons. I counted them. There are 97, I think. I may have lost track somewhere along the way. 97 knobs and buttons. You don't need that. You don't want that. That's a Steinway, and you need to learn to play chopsticks. Let me gently remind you that as wonderful as that thing is, many years ago, hams all over the world were communicating with each other just fine with radios like the venerable Collins KWM2. It's a handsome thing. That's a radio with a total of 10 knobs and switches, including the on-off switch and the three-position, count them three, meter function switch. I'm not advising you to run out to the swap meet and find a KWM2 for your shack, but I am pointing you toward the knowledge that you honestly don't need every single modern doodad contraption and whatchamacallit on your radio, no matter what those wonderful folks over in the exhibit hall tell you. They'll probably try to skin me, so this may be my last presentation, but you don't need all their toys in order to make your shack work. You want something like this. This is the Alinco DXSR8T. List price about, whoops, $479.95. Brand spanking new, in a box. It has a tuning knob, a volume knob, squelch, RIT, and even IF shift, and it covers 160 through 10 meters. We just had one operating at our 7QP, and that thing chugged right along. It did its job. In fact, it kept going when one of our expensive radios pooped out about halfway through the afternoon. For roughly another $150, you can step up to Yaesu's FT891. That's a snazzy little radio. This covers 160 through 6 meters if you decide to play on the Magic Band. It's a very compact radio. Okay, this thing's, that's about the size of a car radio. Because of that, you have to operate it through the menu system. Some people adapt to the Yaesu system right away. It's very intuitive for them. I'm one of them. I have a little Yaesu handheld. I picked it up, I took a look at the instructions, and I can operate it. Other people, my friend John, are in a war with the Yaesu operating system, and he just can't have a Yaesu radio. He's sold 2 of them. So you got to put your hands on the thing and see how you like operating through that menu system. Very versatile radio, and real quality. If your preference runs to ICOM, they offer the ICOM IC718. This is, miraculously enough, almost exactly the same price as that Yaesu radio, about $600. If you are up for a little bit of risk, there's always the used market for ham radios. This actually belonged to a friend of mine, and that note on there explains things like tuning frequency indicator is 5 kilohertz off, read 5 kilohertz low, and you need to wait for this to warm up before you do this, and stuff like that. Okay, so they're going to have their little fidgets and crotchets. They're not going to be straightforward as a brand new radio out of the box. But $250, and I can tell you a secret, he just sold it for $200 at our last swap meet. I would advise you to stay away from eBay. I have heard way too many horror stories about eBay transactions that went south. Try and see the radio in person. If you're in a place that's big enough, Craigslist can be a source. Of course, there's the swap meet out here. You want to at least see the thing light up and make some noise on the receive side. And it's even better if you can take a dummy load along and plug it in and see it, with a watt meter actually make some watts. Okay, that way you know you're buying a radio and not a project. The last major item that'll probably be on your list, depending on the antenna choice that you make, is an antenna tuner. That's the MFJ 949E, which MFJ claims is the most popular tuner in the world. It has lots of range, plenty of power handling capacity, 300 watts, and a new one will set you back about $200. For about $50 less, there's the MFJ travel tuner is what everybody calls this. Now, the real name is the mobile tuner, but if you ask them for a travel tuner, they'll know exactly what you mean. That one is also rated at 300 watts maximum. Okay, so now you have your antenna, your feed line, your radio, maybe a power supply, that would be a good thing, and maybe even a tuner. Let's play radio. What are we going to do? Don't know? Oh, okay. Here's where we get to this menu. Very broadly speaking, there are 3 families of modes which are used on the HF bands: CW, SSB phone, and digital modes. Now, I don't mean to shortchange any of the other modes, such as AM or slow scan TV or any of the other stuff that's happening there, but those are more specialized than what we're covering here today. Now, we're going to fly over CW pretty quickly, too. I kind of suspect that if somebody is committed enough to learn the Morse code, they're committed enough to HF to where they're probably not in this presentation. I will say, since the code requirement went away, there's more code on the air than there ever was before. Why is that? I think of my old welding instructor. I went and took a welding class one time. I asked him which of all these welders we had that he liked the best. He goes, I like my old arc welder. Why do you like your? You kidding? You can buy one of those for $200. And we got the TIG welder, and they say, I love that arc welder. I can go out and I can fix a plow that's buried in mud with that thing. You can arc weld through mud with a good arc welder. That's CW. You can send your signal through mud with CW. It's really good at getting through bad propagation or static or anything else. And that's why it's popular. But it's a whole nother thing to learn the Morse code. You also find a different crowd of people on CW, by the way. There are a couple of spots on the phone bands, especially 20 and 40 meters, that they're crowded with a lot of, yeah, let's put it delicately, less than civil conversation. Something like this. You won't run across that stuff if you're working CW, but if you're on phone, you can easily avoid that by simply, turning the big knob and moving on to another spot on the dial. Now, SSB phone is probably the most popular mode on HF, and there are lots of different ways to use SSB phone. There are contests, HF nets, DXing, and what I call point and shoot. That's where you just tune around until you find a human being and you try to make a contact with them. I'd suggest a good starting point for you is nets. There are lots and lots of them on all of the bands. I did a quick search the other day for 75-meter nets on the net directory search on the League's website. I turned up 144 nets on 75 meters. Now, when I searched all the bands, I got 420 nets. Some of them are really specialized. There's the Medical Reserve Corps net that only fires up on an as-needed basis, and others are, y'all come. Everybody's welcome, and they're on a very regular schedule. Some of them are even daily. Those 144 that I found, by the way, are all listed as wide coverage nets. When you look regional or local, you'll find even more. The reason I suggest nets for you is you can look up exactly when they will be on what frequency. And so it saves you a lot of fruitless hunting. Pick a likely-looking suspect for you, tune in and listen. Listen from the start, because at the start, any good net is going to explain their procedures for you, so you'll know what you're doing. I know the license exams leave the impression with some people that HF operation is wildly different from VHF, UHF operations. You need to speak something like this for HF. There are some differences, and there's some vocabulary to learn, but let me set your mind at ease, okay? Most of it is conducted in plain English. I think you're going to pick up the general idea really quickly. Keep yourself a cheat sheet of the Q codes and the pro signs and all that stuff by your radio. We publish one, we call it Ham Radio Facts, and there are lots of sources for this stuff. Pay attention to the flow of the net, and you'll be up to speed in very little time. Formal nets provide a structured environment that can be great for a beginner. You know when to talk, you know basically what sort of communication is expected, and you have a sense of the rhythm of the net. I really don't suggest starting right into contesting unless you have a good Elmer by your side. You'll get your skills up to speed quickly enough, and then you can go play that game, but, well, Some of the players take the game really, really seriously. And if you're not right on top of the contest exchanges, they get all in a twist. Let's face it, some people kind of lose their minds in the heat of competition. Heaven help you if you slow down their pace or fail to log your QSO. So wait until you know what you're doing a little bit better, and then you're going to have more fun at it. Point and shoot is great if you have a little more patience and you don't care so much about the structured environment of a net. Your best bet is try to tag on to the end of a conversation. That's what it's called, tagging on. That way you'll have the call signs straight and you'll have them written down. Write down call signs. It's easy enough to tag on. You wait till they're wrapped up, and then you say one of their call signs and your call sign. Remember to use those phonetics. It's HF. Sometimes it's really hard to hear, okay? A lot of us are older. I'm to the point where I can barely work SSB phone because of my ears. I can't quite understand an awful lot of it. It's got to be great reception for me to copy it. So use those phonetics and make it easy for folks like me. You tag onto the conversation, and hopefully you've been paying attention to what they've been doing. So if it's been this long-winded conversation about the weather and whose daughter is doing what and blah, 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 well, those are rag chewers. And they like long conversations on the radio, so be prepared for something of a social conversation. If it was call sign location 73 and QRZ, who is calling me, that person is working on some kind of an award. And they want to get in and out with your contacts so they can pile up the contacts for their award. Another toy in our toy box is the digital modes, and these have gotten very popular recently. Some of them are designed for very specialized purposes. I'm going to touch on two of the most popular, the ones where you're most likely to make contacts. One is more of a chat mode. It's like RTTY, like radio teletype, or even like the old AOL Instant Messenger, if you remember that. It's kind of that format. A more social mode, if you will. The other is wildly efficient and strictly about call sign, signal report, 73, and on to the next contact. First, we'll talk about setting up for digital, because it's the same for all the modes. You'll need a computer that's running a reasonably modern operating system. You don't need any sort of high-end gaming computer for this. I'm running my shack off of my old, I got about 800,000 miles on it, laptop, and I assure you its CPU is probably made of balsa wood. It's not a real fast machine. It's running Windows 7, but it gets the job done just fine. You don't need a real fast computer for this. The computer has to get the audio to and from the transceiver. That's how the magic works. It's all done with audio. Here's what I'd call the textbook setup, okay? This is what they teach you in the license manuals. The audio to the computer is coming out of the headphone jack. The audio from the computer is going into the microphone input. It actually doesn't work very well at all. There are some inherent problems with it. First, there's no push-to-talk control anywhere in there, so you either have to manually switch to transmit, or you have to do what a lot of people do, which is run in Vox mode, VOX mode, so that when your computer starts talking, it automatically switches on the transmitter. Second, the audio outputs of both devices are at line level. That's around a volt. Microphone inputs are at mic level. That's around a millivolt. 1 volt, millivolt. We're talking about 30 dB of overload here. So you end up using about a 1/16 of a turn of the volume control to try and get the volume, the level to work. Now, there may be some people working with its textbook setup, but it's not me, and nobody I know has that either. Here's what I'm running and what most of the people I know are running, more or less. Not exactly the same equipment. That box that we've put into the middle here is made by a company called Signal Link. They're out in Oregon. And they make a wide assortment of cables that attach to your radio. There's no standard connection, okay? My radio, like I told you, dates from the disco era, and it has like MIDI plugs back in the back. Others have USB, and others have, you have no idea what's back there until you start trying to hook it up. So there's no standard, but they make cables that match up with just about any radio. That thing replaces the sound card in your computer, and it matches up the level going to the radio. It also controls the push-to-talk function. Well, now that your computer and radio can communicate with each other, the next step is to get the right software running. The first mode we'll talk about is PSK31. There's free software called FLDigi. FLDigi, I think that's how they say it. That's some free software for that mode. There are some others. Ham Radio Deluxe also does PSK31. Now, if you're not familiar with their product, that's quite the software package. It does your logging, it handles multiple digital modes, it integrates with the WSJT software suites, and it does a whole lot more. It is not a free program. At the moment, it's $99.99, but they probably have a special going at the show. For the very weak signal modes that are very popular now, at least for the moment, including FT8, it's the WSJT-X suite of programs. That's a free program. You just go on Joe Taylor's website and you download that. Start with PSK31, the one that's a lot like RTTY or AOL Instant Messenger. It's a keyboard-to-keyboard conversation mode. PSK31 means phase shift keying 31 baud. It's very narrow band. Let's say propagation is looking at least fair on the 15-meter band. You'll tune your radio to 21.230 megahertz. Why did you do that? Because it's the unofficial PSK frequency for that band. And you can find all the frequencies for the different bands online or in our fax book, or I mean, they're easily found. You'll set your radio for upper sideband. Unlike RTTY, the digital modes, just about universally, I think all of them run on USB. Some won't work any other way. The rest run there by convention. Now, you're probably going to hear a lot of static on the frequency. Don't worry about that. PSK31 is made for fair to poor propagation conditions. You fire up the PSK31 software of your choice. Let's say you opted for Ham Radio Deluxe. You're going to get a screen that looks a lot like this one. Now, FLDigi also looks a lot like this. It just has a lot fewer bells and whistles than the Ham Radio Deluxe. Take a look. There's a bunch of signals down here, all clustered up from 21.230. Since it operates with audio, different audio tones create different offsets from 21.230. So there can be a whole lot of signals crowded in there next to 21.230. I think there's about 8 in this picture. When you click on the waterfall display, your software will start decoding whatever that conversation is that you clicked on, which you see in the window above. Now, one little problem with PSK31, FT8 has gotten very popular because it is so good at dealing with bad propagation, so sometimes PSK is a little like this. Kind of hard to find somebody to talk with. But if you're persistent, you'll find somebody. But like I say, it's gotten a little less popular. Then we come to the next to latest officially released weak signal mode, and that is the notorious FT8. As a technical achievement, FT8 is amazing. if PSK31 is a weak signal mode for fair to poor propagation, FT8 is the nearly invisible signal mode. It is quite capable of pulling out a signal with signal-to-noise ratio in the single digits. Single-digit signal-to-noise ratio. It can pull it out. It is specifically designed for poor propagation conditions using low power through a marginal antenna. You do not need to fire up a big old 12-element Yagi on top of a 100-foot tower with your 1,500-watt amplifier to make this work. In fact, it is real bad form to do that. You dial your power down when you're using FT8. First time I ever tried it, I think I told you, we were running 50 watts on 20 meters into a buddy pole that was set out on our patio, and we only had it up about 10 or 12 feet because the wind was blowing that day. You can tell how hopeful I was about this experience. Rotten propagation day. Paul Herman's forecast was all for poor. Every band was going to be rotten, and he was right. I fired up the computer. I tuned in 14.074. That's the 20-meter frequency for FT8. I flailed around with the software for a little bit, and you will flail too, but you'll catch on to it. It's not that complicated. And finally, I got it working, and I made a contact. Oh, yeah. 3.5 miles from my house, but still, it's contact. Then, all of a sudden, I had Wisconsin, Michigan, Belize, and Portugal. Boom, 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 boom. Like I told you, 2.5 hours later, Carrie was going, can we have dinner now? So I was pretty hooked. FT8 comes to us from the great guru of weak signal modes, that is Joe Taylor, K1JT, and from Stephen Franke, K9AN. In fact, FT8 stands for Franke-Taylor 8-tone frequency shift keying. Now, your setup for FT8 is exactly the same as you had for PSK31, except you're going to be running the FT8 software, or the WSJT-X weak signal suite. And again, you can download that from Joe Taylor's site. On the left, this is the FT8 screen. On the left over here, you're seeing everything that's happening on that band in the FT8 world. If you squint, you can see down toward the bottom in the green band, WA6GXQ is calling CQ, right here. If you click on him, I think you double click on him, your computer will go into CQ mode automatically, and it will respond to his CQ. If he answers back, and you have your computer set up to auto sequence, everything goes automatically. All the auto sequences are over here. Now, this is people you've either tried to contact or who are trying to contact you. So that kind of, and all these, you'll watch them, they just kind of march upward as you go along. The new stuff comes in at the bottom. Here's where you set up your standard messages. So he answers back. Your computer will give him a signal report, his will give yours a signal report, and it will even sign off with a pleasant 7-3, and then you're on to the next contact. Now that's about it for in-depth, intimate conversation on FT8. It's about making contacts, it's not a social medium. It's possible to hack in tiny little messages with this part down here in the lower right-hand corner, but I've never seen anybody actually make it work. And besides, it kind of defeats the efficiency of the mode anyway. Now, one thing you must do for this mode and most of them that work on the WSJT suite is get your computer clock accurate. It must be accurate to within a second versus GPS time. There are programs you can install that will automatically update your computer's clock. Windows 10, I presume 11, does a pretty good job of keeping your time accurate, but you can always go on time.is time.is to check it out before you start transmitting. This is what time.is looks like. The reason for the accurate time is that FT8 operates with precisely timed 15-second slots of listening and then transmitting. So if you're not synced up, you're going to be transmitting when the person trying to contact you isn't listening. They're going to be transmitting too, vice versa. All right, so there's your whirlwind tour of getting into HF. Now, before we close up, I have some people out there I want to talk to. You know who you are. It's the perfectionists in the room. Oh yes, I know you're out there. I have some bad news for you perfectionists, okay? I know you want to go on the HF bands and you want everyone to go, wow, this guy really knows his stuff. You don't, and they're going to know that you don't, and it's okay. All right? You're going to make mistakes. Brace yourself. It's going to happen. The good news is that fully 95.27% of all hams, according to a statistic that I just made up, are very friendly, good-humored, and totally forgiving. And so are you. Especially if they find out that you're new to this aspect of the hobby. I can promise you, you're going to get at least 99% encouragement in what you're doing. So get in there and play. That other 1%, or whatever it is, you're not going to make them happy anyway. So forget them, focus on the happy people, and have some fun. They're going to get over their traumatic encounter with you, trust me. Remember, this hobby is about fun. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. If ever there was a great motto for ham radio, that is it. Get out there, get on the radio, have fun, and do wonderful things. All right. Thank you for coming. Thanks for being at Hamvention. Thanks for being in ham radio. And I'm happy to answer questions. Any questions? Show of hands. Yes, sir?
Well, I just want, I've got, well, first.
Two-part.
Thank
Did I say I'd answer two-part?
The first is a thank you for doing this. You're making learning this fun with all your fooling around.
We try to make it fun. By the way, let me say before I get, a lot of what I just covered is in a little book we have at our booth that's called The Fast Track to Finally Getting on the Air with Ham Radio. So a lot of nuts and bolts stuff in there. All right, part two.
Can I ask you why FT8 is so popular? It seems to me like, what's the point if you click a button your mouse does that?
I know. He's asking, why is FT8 so popular? It seems so pointless if you click a button and all this stuff happens. All I can say is try it. And okay, part of the reason it's popular is that it's popular. Oh, you understand? I mean, so there's a critical mass of people out there who are using FT8, and so it's easy to make a contact, right? And also it's popular because it bangs through when nothing else will bang through. And remember, we've had some not great propagation. You're very welcome. I'm getting this signal. I'll be at the back of the room if anybody else wants to chat or come by our booth. We're in 1908.
Thank you for tuning in. This brings a conclusion to the Hamvention forums. Tune back in a little bit later this afternoon when we will be drawing the grand prize. Thanks again.